The blinking cursor on Mia's laptop screen mocked her as she stared at the 100th email in her inbox, all from strangers desperate for answers she wasn't sure she had any right to give. She'd started the advice column 2 years ago on a whim, launching Ask Mia Anything as a simple blog where she could share her thoughts on life, love, and everything in between. What began as a creative outlet during her boring evenings as a waitress had somehow snowballed into something real. 20,000 followers, sponsorship offers, speaking requests she kept declining because the thought of standing in front of a crowd made her want to hide under her covers. The apartment around her was small but cozy, filled with second-hand furniture she'd painted herself and plants she talked to when loneliness crept in too deep. At 26, Mia Chen had built a life that was safe, predictable, and entirely her own. She worked morning shifts at the diner, wrote her column in the afternoons, and pretended she didn't notice how her friends from college were all getting engaged while she came home to an empty apartment every night. Her phone buzzed. Another notification from the blog platform. Someone had left a comment on her latest post about navigating career transitions. She clicked it open, already composing a thoughtful response in her mind. The username was familiar, Truth Seeker 47. He'd been commenting on every single post for the past 6 months, always insightful, always kind, always asking questions that made her think harder about her own advice. She'd come to look forward to his responses, even found herself wondering about the person behind the screen. "Your words about taking risks really resonated today," the comment read. "Sometimes the biggest gamble is staying exactly where we are. Thank you for reminding me that courage looks different for everyone." Mia smiled, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She always tried to respond to comments when she could, but Truth Seeker 47 got special attention. His messages felt genuine in a way that cut through the usual internet noise. "I needed that reminder too," she typed back. "Sometimes I write these columns as much for myself as for anyone else. Hope you're doing well." She hit send and closed her laptop, glancing at the clock. Her shift at the diner started in an hour, which gave her just enough time to shower and make herself presentable. The routine was comfortable, even if it wasn't exactly thrilling. What Mia didn't know, couldn't possibly know, was that Truth Seeker 47 was reading her response from the penthouse office of Chen Industries, 30 floors above the city streets. Alexander Chen, 31 years old and CEO of one of the country's fastest-growing renewable energy companies, leaned back in his leather chair and read her words 3 times. He discovered her blog by accident 6 months ago, clicking a link someone had shared in a business forum about work-life balance. Her writing had hooked him immediately, not because it was polished or professional, but because it was honest. She wrote like she was talking to a friend, vulnerable and real, and in Alexander's world of corporate politics and carefully crafted images, that authenticity was rarer than gold. At first, he'd just been a casual reader. Then he'd started commenting. Then he'd started structuring his day around when she typically posted new content. Then he'd realized he was falling in love with someone he'd never met, someone who had no idea who he was beyond a username on a screen. His assistant knocked on the door, poking her head in. "Your 3 o'clock is here." Alexander nodded, straightening his tie. "Give me 2 minutes." He looked at Mia's response one more time before closing the browser. He'd been searching for her, trying to figure out who she was beyond the blog, but she was careful with her personal information. No photos of her face, no full name, no location beyond, somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. It was driving him crazy in the best possible way. The meeting was with potential investors, the kind of thing he could normally handle in his sleep. But today, His mind kept wandering, wondering what Mia was doing, if she was writing, if she was happy. He'd built an empire worth $200 million, and yet the thing he wanted most was to know the woman who wrote about finding joy in small moments and learning to be brave. Mia's shift at the diner was typical. Breakfast rush, lunch crowd, the usual regulars who knew her by name. She liked the work more than she probably should, liked the simplicity of taking orders and making sure people left happier than they arrived. Her coworkers teased her about being overqualified, especially now that the blog was making enough money that she could probably quit, but she wasn't ready to give up the stability. "Table 6 wants to talk to you," her manager said, nodding toward a corner booth. Mia grabbed her notepad and headed over, expecting another regular with a comment about the coffee. Instead, she found a woman in an expensive suit, laptop open, business card already on the table. "Mia Chen?" the woman asked. Mia's stomach dropped. "Yes, I'm Rebecca Torres, talent agent. I represent bloggers and online content creators. I've been following your work for months, and I think you have serious potential. Have you ever considered expanding beyond the blog? Podcast, book deal, maybe even a television segment?" Mia slid into the booth, her heart racing. "I don't understand. How did you find me?" Rebecca smiled. "I have my ways. Look, I know this is unexpected, but I see something special in what you do. You connect with people. That's worth a lot in this industry. Think about it." She slid the business card across the table. "Call me if you're interested." After Rebecca left, Mia stood in the diner with the business card burning a hole in her apron pocket. This was exactly the kind of opportunity she wrote about in her column, the kind of risk she told other people to take. But actually doing it herself felt terrifying. That evening, she wrote about it in her blog, disguising the details but pouring out her uncertainty. "What do we do when the thing we want shows up at exactly the moment we're not sure we're ready for it?" she wrote. "How do we know when to leap and when to wait?" Alexander read the post at midnight, unable to sleep. He could feel her fear through the words, and he wanted to tell her she was ready, that she was more capable than she knew. Instead, he left a comment. "Maybe we're never ready," he wrote. "Maybe ready is just another word for willing to try." The next morning, Mia called Rebecca. The following 3 months were a whirlwind. Rebecca set up podcast interviews, negotiated a book deal for a collection of essays based on the blog, and somehow got Mia a monthly column in a national women's magazine. Mia cut back her hours at the diner but didn't quit, clinging to that last piece of her old life even as everything else transformed. Through it all, Truth Seeker 47 was there. He commented on every post, asked thoughtful questions, celebrated her wins, and offered perspective when she felt overwhelmed. Mia found herself writing with him in mind, wondering what he'd think, hoping he'd approve. "I feel like I know you," she wrote to him one night in a direct message, breaking her usual rule about not engaging privately with readers. "Is that strange?" His response came quickly. "Not strange at all. I feel the same way. Your writing makes me feel less alone." "What do you do?" she asked. "You always seem to have such smart insights about business and life balance." There was a pause, long enough that she wondered if she'd overstepped. Then, "I work in renewable energy management. It's demanding but meaningful. What about you beyond the blog?" "Waitress," she typed, then added, "for now. Everything is changing so fast I barely recognize my life." "Change is good," he wrote, "especially when it's taking you toward something better." They started messaging more regularly after that, little conversations throughout the day that felt like sunshine. Mia told herself it was just a friendship, that she was being ridiculous for developing feelings for someone she'd never met, but her heart didn't listen to logic. Alexander was having the same problem. He'd wake up thinking about her messages, go to bed wondering if she was okay. His business partners noticed he was distracted during meetings. His mother, who called every Sunday, asked if he was seeing someone because he sounded happy in a way he hadn't in years. "It's complicated," he told her. "Love always is," she said, and he didn't correct her assumption. The problem was that the more he got to know Mia, the harder it became to tell her the truth. He wasn't just some middle manager in renewable energy. He owned the company. He was worth a fortune, and he'd seen enough gold diggers in his life to know that money changed how people looked at him. He didn't want Mia to look at him differently. He wanted her to love him for who he was, not what he had. But keeping the secret felt more wrong with every conversation. Mia's book deal required her to do a promotional tour, which meant appearances at bookstores and libraries across the Pacific Northwest. She was terrified but excited, and she told Truth Seeker 47 about every detail. "What if nobody shows up?" she wrote. "What if I'm boring in person?" "Impossible," he wrote back. "You're the least boring person I've never met." She laughed out loud in her apartment, and the sound surprised her. When was the last time someone had made her laugh like that? The first stop on her tour was Seattle, a bookstore in Capitol Hill that smelled like old paper and coffee. Mia stood behind the podium, looking at the 30 people who'd shown up, and felt her carefully prepared speech evaporate from her brain. "Hi," she said, gripping the podium. "I'm Mia, and I have no idea what I'm doing." The crowd laughed, and the tension broke. She talked about starting the blog, about learning to trust her own voice, about how terrifying and wonderful it was to put yourself out there. The questions afterward were thoughtful, and several people waited in line to have her sign books. One woman, probably in her 60s, took Mia's hands after getting her signature. "You helped me leave a job that was killing my spirit," she said. "Thank you for giving me permission to choose myself." Mia cried in her hotel room that night, overwhelmed by the realization that her words actually mattered, that she was helping people in ways she couldn't fully comprehend. She messaged Truth Seeker 47. "Today was incredible, scary but incredible. I wish you could have been there." "Where was it?" he asked. She told him, along with the schedule for the rest of her tour. Portland next week, then Eugene, then back to Seattle for a final event at a bigger venue. Alexander stared at the message, his heart pounding. She just handed him a roadmap to meet her. He could show up, introduce himself, tell her everything. But what if she rejected him? What if she felt betrayed that he'd hidden his identity? What if the reality of who he was ruined everything they'd built? He made a decision. He'd go to her final Seattle event. He'd watch from the back, see her in person, and figure out what to do from there. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was something. The weeks passed in a blur. Mia's tour was successful beyond Rebecca's projections. The book was selling, the podcast was growing, and suddenly Mia had the kind of financial security she'd only dreamed about. She gave notice at the diner, hugging her coworkers goodbye with tears streaming down her face. "You did it," her manager said, proud. "You really did it." But success felt hollow without someone to share it with. She'd go back to her apartment and want to call someone, to celebrate, to feel less alone in all of it. She had friends, but they didn't understand this new life she was building. The only person who seemed to truly get it was Truth Seeker 47. "Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" she asked him one night. "Every day," he admitted. "Sometimes I wonder who I'd be if I could start over, if I could choose differently." "What would you choose?" "Something simpler, something real, someone real." Mia stared at those words for a long time before responding. "Are you real? The realest thing in my life right now," he wrote, "even though that sounds ridiculous." "It doesn't," she typed. "I feel the same way. Is it crazy that I think about you all the time? That I want to know what you look like, what your voice sounds like, what it would be like to actually talk to you face to face. Alexander's hands shook as he read her message. This was it. This was the moment to tell her everything. But fear locked his throat, his fingers frozen over the keyboard. "I think about that too," he finally wrote. "More than you know." "Maybe we could meet," Mia suggested, her heart hammering so hard she could hear it. "After my tour ends, we could get coffee, talk like normal people." "I'd like that," Alexander wrote, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. "I'd like that very much." They made plans for 2 weeks later after her final Seattle event. A coffee shop in Fremont, neutral territory, 2 o'clock on a Saturday. Mia counted down the days like a teenager, simultaneously excited and terrified. She told Rebecca about it, who raised an eyebrow. "You're meeting an internet stranger." "He's not a stranger," Mia protested. "I've known him for months." "You've known a username for months," Rebecca corrected. "Please be careful. Take someone with you, meet in public, all that smart stuff." Mia promised she would, but privately she wasn't worried. She knew Truth Seeker 47, knew his heart, knew he was good. She could feel it. Alexander, meanwhile, was planning something bigger. He couldn't just show up at a coffee shop and say, "Surprise, I'm a millionaire CEO." That felt wrong, manipulative, like something out of a bad movie. So he decided to tell her everything at her final event, to come clean publicly, to give her the choice of whether to still meet him knowing the full truth. The final event was at a large bookstore downtown, the kind with multiple floors and author events every week. Over 100 people had RSVP'd, and Mia was both thrilled and nauseated by the turnout. She wore a green dress that Rebecca had helped her pick out, did her makeup carefully, and tried not to throw up from nerves. Alexander arrived early, standing in the back corner where he could see but remain relatively hidden. And then Mia walked out onto the small stage and his breath caught in his throat. She was beautiful. Not in the polished, calculated way of the women he usually met at charity galas and business dinners, but in a way that felt warm and genuine. She had long dark hair pulled into a messy bun, nervous hands that gestured while she talked, and a smile that lit up the entire room when someone asked a question she was excited to answer. He listened to her talk about vulnerability, about showing up even when you're scared, about choosing connection over perfection. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that he loved her. During the question and answer portion, Alexander raised his hand before he could talk himself out of it. Mia pointed to him. Yes, in the back. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and Alexander felt the moment crystallize into something he'd remember forever. "This is going to sound strange," he said, his voice carrying through the space, "but I'm Truth Seeker 47. The room went completely silent. Mia's face went pale, then flushed pink. "What?" Alexander walked forward slowly, every eye in the bookstore on him. "I've been following your blog for 6 months, commenting, messaging, falling completely in love with your words and your heart. And I need to tell you something important before we meet for coffee next week, because I can't keep hiding from you." Mia gripped the podium. "I don't understand. My name is Alexander Chen. I own Chen Industries. I'm not just some guy in renewable energy management. I'm the CEO and I'm wealthy, and I've been terrified to tell you because I wanted you to know me as just me, not as what I have or what I've built." The audience was riveting, heads turning between them like watching a tennis match. Someone in the front row whispered, "This is better than the book." Mia's mind was racing. Alexander Chen. She'd heard that name, seen articles about his company, about his work in sustainable energy, about his reputation as one of the city's most eligible bachelors. And he'd been Truth Seeker 47 all along. He'd been the person making her laugh, offering her wisdom, making her feel less alone. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice small. Because I didn't want your perception of me to change, Alexander said honestly, now standing just in front of the stage looking up at her. Because every time someone finds out about the money, they start treating me differently. And with you, I got to just be me. Someone you talked to because you wanted to, not because of what I could offer you. Mia stepped down from the stage, moving closer to him. The audience faded away until it felt like just the two of them in the room. You should have trusted me. I know, he said. And I'm sorry. I'm telling you now because I can't go into meeting you with lies between us, even lies of omission. You deserve honesty, and you deserve the choice of whether you still want to know me now that you know everything. She studied his face, seeing the vulnerability there, the fear that mirrored her own. He was handsome in a way that photographs probably didn't capture, with dark eyes that held genuine warmth and strong features that looked like they didn't smile enough. But he was smiling nervously now, waiting for her response, looking more human and real than any millionaire had a right to look. Ask me, she said. Ask you what? Ask me properly. For coffee. For that date we planned. But ask me as you, as Alexander, with everything out in the open. Relief flooded Alexander's face. Mia Chen, would you have coffee with me next Saturday? I promise to answer any question you have, to be completely honest and to probably be incredibly nervous the entire time. She smiled, and the room seemed to brighten. Yes, I would like that very much. The audience burst into applause and Mia laughed, remembering suddenly that they had an audience of over 100 people who just witnessed the most surreal moment of her life. She turned back to them, shaking her head. Well, that wasn't in my prepared remarks. The crowd laughed, and someone shouted, "Better than any advice column." Alexander retreated to the back, giving her space to finish the event properly, but his eyes never left her. And every time Mia glanced his direction, she felt butterflies swarm her stomach in the best possible way. After the event ended, after she'd signed the last book and said goodbye to the final lingering reader, Alexander was waiting by the front door. That was brave, Mia said, walking up to him. Possibly crazy, but definitely brave. I learned from the best, he said, referencing her own advice about courage. Besides, I couldn't wait another week pretending I didn't want to see you immediately. So why wait until Saturday? Alexander blinked. What? There's a diner around the corner that makes terrible coffee and amazing pie. We could go now if you want. Start this properly. He grinned, and Mia realized she'd never seen him smile fully before. It transformed his whole face, made him look younger and happier and completely irresistible. I would love that. The diner was nearly empty, just a few late-night stragglers nursing coffee and working on laptops. They slid into a corner booth, and Mia ordered cherry pie while Alexander got apple, and they talked. They talked about everything. About how he'd built his company from nothing, starting with a single wind farm and growing into a renewable energy empire. About how terrifying it was to be responsible for hundreds of employees, to make decisions that affected so many lives. About his parents, who'd immigrated from Taiwan before he was born and worked themselves to exhaustion to give him opportunities they'd never had. Mia told him about growing up in a small Oregon town, about her dad who'd passed when she was 19, about using writing as a way to process grief and ending up helping others in the process. About the diner she just left and how strange it felt to not have that anchor anymore. You miss it, Alexander observed. I miss the simplicity, Mia admitted. Everything is so complicated now, good complicated, but still. Sometimes I want to just take orders and refill coffee and not think about podcast analytics or book sales. You could still do that, he said. Nothing says you have to give up the things that ground you just because other things are growing. She tilted her head, considering. Is that what you do? Find ways to stay grounded? I try. I volunteer at a community center on weekends, teaching kids about environmental science. It reminds me why I started the company in the first place. Not for profit, but because I wanted to make a difference. They talked until the diner staff started giving them pointed looks, and then they moved to a bench outside, neither ready to end the conversation. The Seattle night was cold and Mia shivered. Without asking, Alexander shrugged off his jacket and draped it around her shoulders. "Thank you," she said, pulling it close. It smelled like him, like something woodsy and clean. "I meant what I said earlier," Alexander said quietly. "About falling in love with your words. With you. I know that's probably too much too fast, but I don't want to play games or pretend I feel less than I do." Mia's heart raced. "It's not too much. I feel it too. Have been feeling it for weeks, maybe months. I just didn't think you were real, that this could be real." "I'm real," he said, reaching for her hand. "This is real." She laced her fingers through his, and the touch sent electricity through her entire body. They sat like that for a long time, hands clasped, shoulders touching, watching the city lights reflect off the water in the distance. "What happens now?" Mia finally asked. "Now we figure it out together," Alexander said. "No more hiding, no more secrets, just us taking it one day at a time." "I like the sound of that." He turned to look at her, his eyes serious. "I need you to know something. My life is complicated. There are business dinners and charity events and a lot of public appearances. There are people who will judge you for being with me, who will assume things about your motivations. And I will do everything in my power to protect you from that, but I can't make it disappear entirely." Mia squeezed his hand. "I'm not afraid of complicated. I write an advice column telling people to be brave, to take risks, to choose love even when it's scary. It would be pretty hypocritical if I didn't follow my own advice." Alexander smiled, relief and joy mixing on his face. "You're extraordinary, you know that." "I'm really not," she laughed. "I'm just a waitress who started a blog." "You're so much more than that. You're the person who reminded me that life is about more than building an empire. You're the person who makes me want to be better, to live bigger, to actually feel things instead of just going through the motions." Before Mia could respond, Alexander leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. Their lips met in a kiss that felt like coming home and starting an adventure all at once, gentle and sure and absolutely perfect. When they pulled apart, Mia was smiling so wide her cheeks hurt. "That was nice. Just nice," Alexander teased. "Amazing, earth-shattering. Everything I didn't know I was waiting for. Better," he said and kissed her again. They eventually said goodnight, though neither wanted to. Alexander called her a car and she insisted she could take the bus, and they compromised with him riding with her to make sure she got home safely. At her apartment building, he walked her to the door. "Tomorrow?" he asked hopefully. "Tomorrow," she confirmed. "Lunch?" "Lunch, dinner, breakfast, coffee breaks, all of it. I have 6 months of not seeing you to make up for." She laughed and kissed him one more time before heading inside, turning at the door to wave. He waited until she was safely in the building before walking back to his car, feeling like his entire world had shifted on its axis in the best possible way. The next weeks were a blur of falling in love. Alexander showed up at Mia's apartment with breakfast, and they spent the morning on her couch talking about their dreams. She met him for lunch at his office, eyes widening at the sleek building and the employees who all seemed slightly intimidated by their boss. He came to her podcast recording, sitting in the corner and making her laugh so hard she had to stop and restart. They went on proper dates. Dinner at nice restaurants where Alexander knew the chef, and Mia felt slightly out of place in her simple dresses, until he assured her, She was the most beautiful person in the room. Coffee shops where they worked side by side, her writing her column while he reviewed contracts, their feet touching under the table. Walks along the waterfront where they talked about everything and nothing, holding hands and stealing kisses when they thought no one was watching. Mia met Alexander's parents 3 weeks in, terrified they'd think she wasn't good enough for their successful son. Instead, his mother hugged her tight and said, "You make him happy. I can see it in his eyes. That's all I've ever wanted for him." His father, quieter but warm, told her, "Alexander has always worked too hard, cared too much about business and not enough about life. You remind him to be human. Thank you for that." Alexander met Mia's mother a week later, driving down to her small Oregon hometown and sitting in her childhood kitchen, eating homemade cookies. Her mother, who'd been skeptical about the internet millionaire her daughter was dating, softened when she saw how Alexander looked at Mia like she hung the moon. "He's good for you," she told Mia later, while Alexander was outside looking at the garden. "Better than that boy you dated in college who never appreciated you. He's everything, Mom," Mia admitted. "I didn't know I could feel like this." Her mother hugged her. "That's how I felt about your father. Hold on to it, baby. This kind of love doesn't come around often." Of course, it wasn't all perfect. There were adjustments, compromises, moments of friction. Mia struggled with the attention that came from dating someone like Alexander. Paparazzi showed up at her apartment, and gossip sites speculated about their relationship, calling her a gold digger and worse. She tried to ignore it, but some days the comments got to her. "Maybe this is too much," she said one night, sitting in Alexander's penthouse after a particularly brutal article had called her a nobody trying to social climb. Alexander put down his tablet and pulled her close. "They don't know you. They don't know us. Don't let strangers with keyboards dictate your happiness." "It's not just that," Mia said. "Your world is so different from mine. I wore the wrong dress to that charity gala last week and I could see people judging me. I used the wrong fork at dinner with your business partners. I don't fit in your life." "My life isn't galas and business dinners," Alexander said firmly. "My life is you. Everything else is just obligation and noise. And for the record, I didn't even notice which fork you used. I was too busy being grateful you were there with me, making the whole thing bearable." She looked up at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. "Really, really. Mia, I don't need you to fit into my world. I need you to be exactly who you are because that's who I fell in love with. The rest is just details we'll figure out together." She kissed him, pouring all her gratitude and love into it. "I love you." It was the first time she'd said it out loud, and Alexander's entire face transformed with joy. "I love you too. Have loved you for months, probably since that first comment where you told me that courage looks different for everyone. You made me want to be braver, Mia. You still do." They worked through it together. Alexander hired a publicist to help manage the media attention and make sure Mia's privacy was protected as much as possible. Mia talked to Rebecca about using her platform to address the gossip, writing a column about the reality of dating in the public eye and the cruelty of making assumptions about people's relationships. The column went viral, shared thousands of times, with people praising her honesty and vulnerability. Alexander framed the first comment from Truth Seeker 47, a reminder of where they'd started. 4 months into their relationship, Alexander had to travel to Japan for a business deal. He asked Mia to come with him, and she said yes without hesitation. They spent a week in Tokyo, exploring temples and trying street food and laughing at Alexander's attempts to remember the Japanese his grandmother had tried to teach him as a child. One night, standing on the balcony of their hotel room overlooking the city lights, Alexander wrapped his arms around Mia from behind. "I want to tell you something," he said quietly. "Okay," she said, leaning back into him. "Before I met you, before I started reading your blog, I was going through the motions. I'd built this company, achieved everything I was supposed to want, and I felt empty, like I was missing the whole point of life. And then I found your writing, and it was like someone turned the lights on. You reminded me what matters. Connection, honesty, being brave enough to be vulnerable. You saved me, Mia." She turned in his arms to face him. "You saved me too. I was hiding, playing it safe, too scared to really live. You made me want more, want better, want everything." He kissed her softly. "Move in with me." Mia pulled back, surprised. "What? Move in with me? Not the penthouse if you don't want it. We can find a place together, somewhere that feels like us. I just don't want to spend another night without you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. I want to build a life with you, a real one, not just stolen moments between our schedules." Her heart was racing. "Alexander, that's a big step. I know. And if it's too soon, I'll wait. I'll wait as long as you need. But I'm sure about you, about us, about this. I've never been more sure of anything." Mia looked at him, at this man who'd been a username on a screen 6 months ago and was now the most important person in her world. She thought about her little apartment with its second-hand furniture, about the safety of living alone, about all the reasons she should say it was too fast. And then she thought about what she always told her readers. That life is short, that love is rare, that sometimes the biggest risk is not taking the leap. "Yes," she said. "Let's do it. Let's find our place together." Alexander's smile was brilliant. He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing, and the Tokyo lights sparkled below them like a promise of all the adventures to come. They found a house a month later, not a penthouse or a mansion, but a real home in a quiet Seattle neighborhood. It had a yard for the garden Mia wanted to plant, and a home office for Alexander to work from when he didn't need to be downtown. They moved in together on a rainy Saturday, with help from friends and Alexander's assistant, who kept making jokes about the boss doing manual labor. Mia set up a cozy writing nook in the corner of the living room, with a view of the garden and space for all her plants. Alexander claimed he didn't need much space for himself, happy just to be wherever she was. They hung photos on the walls, a mix of their separate pasts and their shared present. They learned each other's domestic habits, like how Alexander couldn't function before coffee and Mia always left cabinet doors open. They had their first fight about something stupid, about Alexander working too late and missing dinner. Mia said he was prioritizing work over them, and Alexander said she was being unfair, that he was building something important. They went to bed angry, on opposite sides of the mattress, and both lay awake miserable until Alexander finally broke the silence. "I'm sorry," he said. "You're right. I was hiding in work because I'm scared." Mia rolled over to face him. "Scared of what? Of how much I need you. Of how completely you've changed my life. It's terrifying being this happy, this vulnerable. What if something happens? What if I lose you?" She moved closer, taking his hand. "You can't protect yourself from loss by pulling away. That's just losing me in a different way. I need you to be present, to choose us even when work is demanding. I know. I'll do better, I promise. And I'll try to be more understanding about the pressures you're under. We're a team, right? We figure it out together." "Together," he agreed and pulled her close. They made up thoroughly, and from then on they were better about communicating, about addressing problems before they festered into fights. Mia's career continued to grow. Her book hit bestseller lists, and she was offered a television development deal for a talk show based on her advice column. She was terrified but excited, and Alexander supported her completely, showing up to every taping and giving her pep talks when her anxiety threatened to overwhelm her. For his part, Alexander expanded Chen Industries into new markets, but he was more intentional about balance. He worked from home twice a week, took actual lunch breaks with Mia, and instituted a rule that weekends were for them unless there was an absolute emergency. They traveled together, mixing business trips with vacation. Paris for a renewable energy conference with side trips to museums and cafes. Hawaii for a genuine vacation, learning to surf and eating fresh pineapple on the beach. Oregon to visit Mia's mom, who doted on Alexander and told embarrassing stories about Mia's childhood. 1 year into their relationship, Alexander took Mia back to the bookstore where he'd revealed himself. The owner had kept it quiet, and they had the whole space to themselves after hours. "Why are we here?" Mia asked, looking around at the familiar shelves. "Because this is where everything changed," Alexander said. "This is where I stopped hiding and started really living, and I wanted to come back here for this." He got down on one knee, and Mia's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes already filling with tears. "Mia Chen, you are the bravest, kindest, most extraordinary person I've ever known. You taught me how to be vulnerable, how to live authentically, how to love without fear. You make every single day better just by being in it, and I want to spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you make me. Will you marry me?" The ring was beautiful, a simple, elegant setting that was so perfectly her taste that she knew he'd paid attention to everything she'd ever casually mentioned. But the ring didn't matter nearly as much as the man holding it, looking at her with his whole heart in his eyes. "Yes," she said, crying and laughing at the same time. "Yes, absolutely yes." He slid the ring on her finger and stood, pulling her into a kiss that felt like a promise. They held each other in the quiet bookstore, surrounded by thousands of stories, knowing they were writing their own. The wedding was 6 months later, a perfect autumn day in a garden overlooking the Sound. They kept it relatively small, just family and close friends, despite Alexander's mother lobbying for something bigger. Mia wore a simple white dress, and Alexander cried when he saw her walking down the aisle. Their vows were personal, handwritten, brutally honest. Mia promised to always tell him the truth, even when it was hard, to support his dreams while pursuing her own, to love him in the mundane moments as much as the extraordinary ones. Alexander promised to choose her every day, to be present and open and brave enough to be vulnerable, to build a life that was about more than success and achievement. "You are my greatest adventure," he told her. "My favorite story, my home." There wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. The reception was perfect, full of laughter and dancing and toasts that ranged from touching to hilarious. Mia's best friend from college told stories about how Mia used to complain about never finding someone who really understood her, and how she'd known from the first time Mia mentioned Truth Seeker 47 that something was different. Alexander's business partner gave a speech about how Alexander had been insufferable when he first fell for Mia, constantly distracted and checking his phone, and how it was the best thing that ever happened to him. They danced their first dance to a song they'd both loved, pressed close together, the rest of the world fading away. This was everything Mia hadn't known she was looking for. Not perfection, but partnership. Not a fairy tale, but something real and lasting and true. Their honeymoon was 2 weeks in New Zealand, hiking and exploring and remembering what it felt like to just be together without obligations or schedules. They talked about their future, about the family they wanted to build, about growing old together and all the adventures still to come. When they returned home, they settled into married life with surprising ease. They'd already been living together, already knew each other's rhythms and quirks, so marriage felt less like a change and more like an affirmation of what they already had. Mia's talk show premiered 3 months after the wedding and was an immediate hit. Her authentic, compassionate approach to advice resonated with viewers, and she quickly became one of the network's rising stars. She used her platform to spotlight important issues, bringing on experts to talk about mental health, relationships, career challenges, and personal growth. Alexander expanded Chen Industries into international markets, but he was strategic about it, making sure the growth didn't come at the expense of his values or his time with Mia. He brought her to business dinners and conferences, and she charmed everyone she met, completely comfortable now in a world that had once intimidated her. They talked about starting a family, but decided to wait a bit longer, wanting to enjoy being newlyweds and building their careers. But they got a dog, a golden retriever puppy they named Buddy, who became the third member of their little family and provided endless entertainment with his antics. 2 years into their marriage, Mia got sick. Nothing serious, just a persistent flu that wouldn't go away. After the 3rd week, Alexander insisted she see a doctor, worried it was something more serious. The doctor did a full workup and came back with unexpected news. Mia wasn't sick. She was pregnant. They sat in the car outside the doctor's office, holding hands, processing the information. "We weren't trying," Mia said quietly. "No, we weren't," Alexander agreed. "But are you happy about it?" She turned to look at him, seeing her own mixture of surprise and joy reflected in his face. "I think I am. Are you?" "I'm terrified and thrilled and completely overwhelmed," he admitted. "But yes, I'm happy. We're going to have a baby." "We're going to have a baby," Mia repeated, and then she was crying and laughing, and Alexander was holding her, both of them overwhelmed by the beautiful surprise of it all. Pregnancy was harder than Mia expected. She had terrible morning sickness for the first trimester and was exhausted all the time. The talk show was understanding, adjusting her schedule so she could work less, and Alexander was incredible. He took over all the cooking, rubbed her feet every night, and dealt with her hormonal mood swings with patience and humor. They found out they were having a girl, and Mia cried happy tears in the ultrasound room while Alexander gripped her hand and stared at the screen in awe. "That's our daughter," he whispered. "We made a person." They prepared the nursery together, painting the walls a soft yellow and filling it with books and toys. Alexander's mother was beside herself with excitement about her first grandchild, already knitting blankets and buying tiny outfits. Mia's mother visited for a week and helped set up the house for the baby, full of advice and stories about when Mia was born. The last month of pregnancy was the longest of Mia's life. She was huge and uncomfortable, and so ready to meet their daughter. Alexander barely left her side, working from home and hovering nervously every time she had a contraction. She went into labor on a Tuesday afternoon, 2 days before her due date. Alexander stayed calm right up until they got to the hospital, and then he was a nervous wreck, pacing and asking the nurses questions and generally being useless until Mia told him to sit down and hold her hand. Labor was long and hard, but Alexander never left her side. He coached her breathing, told her she was doing great, let her squeeze his hand so hard she left marks. And when their daughter finally arrived, healthy and screaming, he cried harder than Mia had ever seen. They named her Sarah, after Alexander's grandmother who'd passed away when he was young. She had Mia's dark hair and Alexander's eyes, and she was perfect. The first weeks were exhausting. Neither of them had any idea what they were doing, stumbling through diaper changes and feeding schedules and trying to function on 2 hours of sleep. But they figured it out together, taking turns with night feedings and supporting each other through the overwhelming adjustment. Alexander was a devoted father from day one, completely smitten with his tiny daughter. He'd hold her for hours, just staring at her in wonder, telling her stories about renewable energy and making Mia laugh until she cried. "You know she can't understand you, right?" Mia said one night, watching him give Sarah a very serious lecture about solar panels. "She will eventually," Alexander said. "I'm getting her ready." Mia took a break from the talk show, wanting to spend the first year home with Sarah. She continued writing her blog and her magazine column, working during naps and quiet moments, but her focus was on their daughter and their family. Sarah grew quickly, hitting milestones that filled them with pride. Her first smile, her first laugh, her first successful grab of Buddy's tail. Alexander took 1,000 photos, documenting every moment, and Mia teased him about being that parent but secretly loved it. When Sarah was 6 months old, they baptized her in a small ceremony with family and close friends. Looking around at the people who'd supported them through everything, Mia felt overwhelmingly grateful. This life, this family, this love, it was more than she'd ever imagined for herself. Alexander seemed to read her mind. He squeezed her hand, Sarah asleep in his arms, and whispered, "Best comment I ever left." She laughed, remembering that first interaction 6 months before they met in person. "Best reply I ever wrote." Life settled into a new normal. Mia returned to work when Sarah turned 1. The show adding a segment where she answered questions from new parents. Alexander continued growing Chen Industries, but made sure family time was sacred, turning down deals that would require too much travel and bringing Mia and Sarah with him when he absolutely had to go somewhere. They had hard days, exhausting days, days where they bickered about whose turn it was to change a diaper or who'd forgotten to buy more formula. But they always came back to each other, always chose love, always remembered how lucky they were to have found each other in the vast chaos of the internet. Sarah's first birthday party was a joyful chaos of family and friends and far too many presents. She destroyed her cake with gleeful abandon, getting frosting everywhere, and Alexander and Mia looked at each other over her messy head and grinned. "We did okay," Mia said. "We did great," Alexander corrected. "She's happy and healthy and loved." "I was talking about us," Mia said. "We did okay with us." Alexander pulled her close, careful not to get cake frosting on her dress. "We did better than okay. We built something real, something lasting. You and me and Sarah, this is everything." That night, after the guests left and Sarah was asleep and the house was quiet again, they sat in the garden holding hands and watching the stars. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" Mia asked. "If you'd never found my blog, or if you'd never commented, or if I'd said no to meeting you. All the time," Alexander admitted. "And then I'm grateful for whatever twist of fate brought us together. You changed my entire life, Mia, made it worth living instead of just going through the motions." "You did the same for me," she said. "Taught me to be brave, to take chances, to believe I deserved something extraordinary." He kissed her temple. "So what do you think? Should we go for round 2? Mia looked at him, startled. "You want another baby, eventually, maybe." "Sarah should have siblings if we can manage it. But I was actually talking about dessert. There's leftover birthday cake." She laughed and swatted his arm. "You're terrible. You love me anyway." "I really do," she said. "So much it scares me sometimes. Good scared or bad scared?" "Good scared," Mia confirmed. "The kind of scared that means it matters, that it's real, that I have something precious to protect." They sat there a while longer, not talking, just being together. Inside, their daughter slept peacefully. Around them, the life they'd built hummed with possibility. And above them, the stars kept shining, witnessing the continuation of a love story that had started with words on a screen and grown into something neither of them could have predicted. 3 years later, they welcomed a son. They named him Daniel, and he had Alexander's serious expression and Mia's quick smile. Sarah was an enthusiastic big sister, constantly trying to help in ways that were more chaotic than useful, but her love for her baby brother was evident. The house was louder now, messier, filled with toys and laughter and the beautiful chaos of family life. Alexander learned to function on even less sleep, and Mia perfected the art of working with a toddler on her lap and a baby in a nearby swing. Chen Industries continued to thrive, recognized internationally for innovation in renewable energy. Alexander won awards and gave speeches, but he always came home to Mia and the kids, leaving work at work as much as possible. His employees respected him not just for his business acumen, but for his integrity, for the way he balanced ambition with humanity. Mia's talk show had a successful 5-year run before she decided to step back, wanting more time with her children while they were young. She continued her blog, now more popular than ever, and wrote 2 more books. Her writing evolved to include reflections on marriage and parenthood, and her readers appreciated her honesty about the struggles as much as the joys. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Alexander planned a surprise. He'd arranged for the kids to stay with his parents and recreated their first real date at the diner. Same booth, same terrible coffee, same amazing pie. "Remember this?" he asked, sliding into the booth across from her. "How could I forget?" Mia said, smiling at the memory. "I was so nervous I could barely eat. I was convinced you were going to decide I wasn't worth the hassle of dating a public figure," Alexander admitted. "Spent the whole night trying not to seem desperate." "You were perfect," Mia said. "Are perfect. Even when you leave wet towels on the bathroom floor and forget to close the kitchen cabinets. Even when you steal all the blankets and watch terrible reality shows," Alexander countered, grinning. They ate pie and talked about everything and nothing, falling back into the easy conversation that had always been the foundation of their relationship. When they got home, the house was quiet without the kids, strange and peaceful. "I miss them already," Mia said. "Me too," Alexander agreed. "But it's nice to have you to myself for a night." He pulled her close, and she melted into him, still feeling that spark of electricity she'd felt the first time they'd kissed. Some things never got old. The years continued to pass, full and rich and occasionally overwhelming. Sarah started school and loved it, coming home every day with stories and artwork and a vocabulary that expanded exponentially. Daniel grew from a baby into a rambunctious toddler who kept them on their toes. Mia and Alexander grew together, learning and adapting and choosing each other through all of it. They had disagreements and hard conversations and moments when parenthood and work and life felt like too much. But they always came back to the foundation they'd built, the trust and love and commitment that had started with honest words on a screen. On Sarah's 7th birthday, they took the family to the bookstore where Alexander had revealed himself to Mia. The kids ran through the aisles, excited about picking new books, while Mia and Alexander stood in the spot where their lives had changed forever. "I still can't believe you did that," Mia said, shaking her head. "In front of 100 people." "Had to be dramatic," Alexander said, pulling her close. "Make sure you knew I was serious." "I definitely knew," she laughed. "Pretty sure everyone in Seattle knew after that. They bought the kids way too many books and went home to a birthday party that was perfectly chaotic." That night, tucking Sarah into bed surrounded by her new stories, Mia felt that familiar wave of gratitude wash over her. "Mom," Sarah asked sleepily. "How did you and Daddy meet?" Mia smiled. "That's a good story. Want to hear it?" Sarah nodded and Mia began. "Once upon a time, I wrote advice on the internet to help people with their problems. And there was someone who read everything I wrote, someone kind and smart and thoughtful. But I didn't know who he was, just words on a screen. Then one day, he was brave enough to tell me the truth, to step out from behind the words and be real. And it turned out he was pretty great in person too. "And you got married and had me," Sarah said, pleased with the story. "And we got married and had you," Mia confirmed. "Best surprise of our lives." She kissed Sarah's forehead and turned out the light, finding Alexander waiting in the hallway. "Good story?" he asked. "The best," she said, and meant it with everything she was. Years later, when Sarah was a teenager and Daniel was in elementary school and life had taken on a comfortable rhythm, Mia wrote a column that went viral one more time. It was about the risks worth taking, about choosing love even when it's scary, about how the best things in life often come from the most unexpected places. 8 years ago, I met a stranger on the internet, she wrote. He was just a username, just words on a screen. But those words changed my life. They challenged me, encouraged me, made me think differently. And when that stranger turned out to be real, when he turned out to be brave enough to step into the light and tell me the truth, I had a choice. I could protect myself, stay safe, avoid the risk. Or I could be equally brave. I could take the chance on something that felt too good to be true. I'm so grateful I chose bravery, because that choice gave me everything. A partner who sees me, supports me, challenges me. A family I never knew I needed. A life full of love and purpose and joy. So if you're standing at that crossroads, wondering if you should take the risk, my advice is simple. Be brave. Choose love. Choose truth. Choose the chance to build something real. You never know what extraordinary story might be waiting on the other side. The column was shared millions of times, with readers thanking her for the reminder, for the hope, for the proof that good things still happen. Alexander read it in his office and had to take a moment to compose himself before his next meeting. That night, he found Mia in her writing nook, staring at the computer screen. "Beautiful column today," he said. "Thank you," she said. "Just felt like the right time to tell that part of our story." He wrapped his arms around her from behind, the same way he had in Tokyo all those years ago. "I love our story." "Me too," Mia said. "Every chapter, every page, every word." They stood there together, comfortable in the silence, comfortable in each other. Outside, they could hear the kids playing in the yard, their laughter floating through the open window. Buddy barked, probably chasing a squirrel. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was an ordinary moment, the kind that made up the bulk of a life. And yet, looking back on everything that had brought them here, from a simple blog comment to this beautiful, chaotic, perfect existence, Mia knew there was nothing ordinary about it at all. She turned in Alexander's arms and kissed him, pouring 8 years of love and gratitude into it. When they pulled apart, he was smiling. "What was that for?" "Just because," Mia said. "Because I'm happy. Because I love you. Because you took a chance on commenting on a stranger's blog and changed both our lives." "Best decision I ever made," Alexander said. "Well, that and showing up at that book event, and marrying you, and all the decisions that led to this moment right here." "All good decisions," Mia agreed. The kids called them from outside, wanting to show them something important. They went together, hand in hand, ready for whatever came next. Because that's what they'd always done, from that very first message. They faced life together, brave enough to be real, wise enough to choose love, grateful enough to appreciate the extraordinary gift of finding your person in a world of 8 billion people. And they lived, truly lived, happily ever after. Not in the fairy tale sense where everything was perfect and easy, but in the real sense where love was a choice they made every day, where commitment meant showing up through the hard parts, where happy came from building something meaningful together. They had their challenges and their triumphs, their mundane Tuesdays and their spectacular adventures. They raised their children with love and intention, built careers they were proud of, supported each other through losses and celebrations. They grew older together, their love deepening with every passing year, every shared experience, every quiet moment of understanding. And sometimes, late at night when the house was quiet and the kids were asleep, they'd sit together and remember that first blog post, that first comment, that first brave step into the unknown. They'd marvel at the unlikely path that brought them together and the conscious choice to keep choosing each other every single day. That was their story, not perfect but perfectly theirs, and they wouldn't change a single word.